You're listening to ayahuascapodcast.com.
If you find yourself in a situation where, for example, ayahuasca has told you to quit your job, sell everything, move to the jungle, I don't know, or stop your relationship, this is what you shouldn't do just for safety, just for precaution. You shouldn't go to your house the next morning and break up with your partner. You should listen to what ayahuasca told you. You should take it in consideration, and then you should give yourself some time. Give yourself 4 weeks, give yourself 8 weeks, give yourself 8 months, and really think about it. Like, is it a good idea to break up with this person? What are the consequences? Are children involved? Just think of the logistics, and if 3 months later, this is still a good idea, and it seems like an important idea, then okay. So the first test is the test of time. And I would recommend that anybody that gets like a major sort of calling from ayahuasca always gives it the test of time. Because if it's a true calling, it will be true today and it will be true 3 months from now. But if it was just something that happened to you in ayahuasca, well, then it was just because sometimes these things happen. So that's the first test, is the test of time.
Hi guys, and welcome to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, we do the host Sam Believe. Today I'm having a conversation with Jeronimo Mazarrasa. Jeronimo is a community activist focused on ayahuasca and the director of social innovation at ICEERS. He has over 20 years of experience in psychedelic field. He has dedicated his work to researching how ceremonial plant practices can be integrated in the societies outside of their cultures of origin. In this episode, we talk about globalization of ayahuasca, maximizing benefits of ayahuasca, minimizing harm. What risks are there? Distinguishing between ego talking and real messages from ayahuasca. Lessons from indigenous practices, prevention versus treatment, ICEERS, and so much more. Enjoy this episode. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you. Jeronimo, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Jeronimo, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did your life bring you to work with plant medicines?
Well, I was counting the other day, and it's been now 35 years since I've been interested in psychedelics, and a little bit more than 20 years since I've been drinking ayahuasca. Out of those 35, when I started, it was out of a personal interest. I was also sort of fascinated by the topic, but it had very much to do with my own process and my own search. And for a number of years, more than 10 years, I was working on a number of documentaries having to do with these plants, and in general with encounter of indigenous knowledge with the rest of the world, which was also the globalization of the plants. I had done some work. We'd done some previous work for documentaries on mushrooms and on Salvia divinorum, and we had a plan to make sort of like one documentary per plant. And then when we arrived to ayahuasca, this was 2003, there was a lot less information. Iquitos was not what it is. There was, most of the information online was about the Santo Daime, basically, and the Brazilian churches. And when we went to Brazil, we spent 3 months there shooting with the different churches. And I was just sort of astounded because the work that we had been doing in Mexico with, mushrooms, salvia, sometimes it felt almost like sort of archaeology. You were looking for the last remnants of culture, of practices that were in the past much bigger, but that now were, they seem almost to be on its way to disappearing. They were much smaller than they had once been. So I was astounded when I got to Brazil and just saw ayahuasca that was just sort of a thriving, living culture. It was huge, in expansion. Very, very different from the experience we had in Mexico. So I became fascinated with this, and with sort of trying to make a film that would somehow be like a family portrait. I wanted to put like all the different traditional manifestations of traditional practices around ayahuasca in one sort of film. And it took me a number of years to sort of realized that was impossible. It was too large, even if you stuck just to the traditional practices. But this process was, very interesting personally for myself, and also very interesting in sort of my understanding of how broad and how rich traditional ayahuasca cultures are. From there, I would say it was a slow process to basically to come to the conclusion that there were better things I could do for these plants than spend 10 years of my life making 90 minutes of video. So I began to collaborate with different groups and activist groups in Spain. And slowly I began to collaborate more and more with ICEERS, which is a foundation that has been based in Barcelona. We organize the World Ayahuasca Conferences. We do many other things, but ICEERS has been existing for 15 years. I started collaborating with them 10 years ago, and then little by little, my collaboration got first as a volunteer, then it got bigger, until today. Most of my work, as you said, revolves around the sort of the how to maximize the benefits and minimize the harms of the globalization of these practices. So I think it's not a matter of debate that ayahuasca is globalized. You can find ayahuasca ceremonies just about in every country in the world. Other plants are following, San Pedro, etc., etc. And, with this comes great opportunities and also certain dangers. And, my work and my commitment is to make, hopefully the best out of the opportunities and to minimize the dangers. And this takes different shapes. We do, policy work, we do scientific research, we do legal defense for people who get arrested working with ayahuasca. And we also do harm reduction. We have a free support center where we give people integration sessions for people who have been having troubles. And we also do policy work at the UN level. We work with Indigenous people. I mean, there's many actors involved, and it's very multifacetic, sort of the expansion of this. And also the work that is required to create a home for these practices outside of the countries of origin. So we engage with all of these things. And a large part of my work or my focus these coming months has to do with how do we get this sort of increase the standards of safety, the minimum standards of safety among medicine plant facilitators. How do we come to sort of an agreement of what would be the ground, not the best practices of the work, because I don't think those can be codified in any meaningful way. But certainly we can agree on what the ground sort of safety should look like. And that's a lot of the work I do. I meet with facilitators in many countries. We do harm reductions, we do training programs. We have an academy where we teach about all this, but basically I gather the information and the wisdom and the knowledge about safety that has been developed by many different facilitators in many different places. I learn from their best techniques, and all of this gets compiled into a course where we teach. Basically, we simply put together the information and we redistribute it. So
sounds like a very important work to do in this field, because it's a bit of Wild West right now, and a lot of places that try and offer some kind of information seems like more of a money grab, just a very expensive courses saying the same information over and over again. So what you say you focus mostly on maximizing benefits and minimizing the harm. So let's start with maximizing the benefits. What are the main things to maximize the benefits of work with ayahuasca?
Well, I mean, I think one of the important things is that basically when something new, for example, a new technology enters a culture, like for example, X-rays, when X-rays were first invented, people are very excited about it. And then they start using it all the time for everything. So when X-rays were first discovered, they were doing X-rays on pregnant women. They were keeping people inside the X-ray machine for hours because it was so exciting to be able to look inside the body. And it took a number of years to realize that, well, X-rays are actually really active and they create problems, and there's a safer way to actually manage this very powerful technology. But the early days of anything are usually full of mistakes before things get developed. And this is sort of a natural process of how societies learn. So, for example, I give you an example. You're drinking coffee. I think you know about latte art. Latte art are these drawings that people make on their coffee cups. This started 20 years ago with some people, I don't know, their names are known, and they started just drawing very simple flowers. And then from this, other people learn, and other people learn. And, in 20 years, now they can draw, Mona Lisa. I mean, they're making incredible drawings on your latte, right? You can see a progression from not very good at it to really good at it. And this happens very fast through the collaboration of many people. This is how our societies learn. And it's an organic process, and it happens by itself, unless the practice has to be clandestine and people have to hide. And then when that happens, this process is broken and people don't learn from each other. So, we are just about, you think of anything that we've been doing for 60 years, making cars, driving, skateboarding, surfing, drawing lattes. We are better than we were 60 years ago. But you look at our use of psychedelics, you look at the way people take LSD today, and you could argue that it's not much better than the way people took LSD in the 60s. And that's because because of this clandestinity. People are hiding, people work in isolation, people don't communicate, people don't share, the information flow doesn't go, and then their practices doesn't get better. So one big part of maximizing the benefits of these plants have to do with the fact that as long as they're illegal or underground, as long as people are hiding, as long as there's not an open flow of communication, it's very hard to make this, to sort of facilitate for this organic process of learning to take place, basically. So, what a lot of the, work we do around this has to do with, presenting proposals for policy, trying to imagine what the regulation would look like in a world, 20, 30 years from now, in which plant medicine practices can be practiced legally and safely. What does that even look like? What does the regulation look like? Who gets to decide who's legitimate and who isn't? Where do the complaints go? All of these questions we think about. And
it's all very valuable, and it makes a lot of sense, because if the communication is not open, if nobody's allowed to talk about anything, how are we supposed to grow from each other? So hopefully this podcast and sort of psychedelic renaissance we're going through right now, where things are opening up, will result in more learning, because I've definitely learned a lot about facilitation from internet, and not everything is true, but definitely some of it works. And you assumed that I was drinking coffee, which is not safe to assume. It's an ayahuasca podcast, maybe I was drinking ayahuasca. But no, I'm drinking a decaf coffee. I stopped drinking caffeinated coffee, and it's painful because I'm literally surrounded by coffee farms, but I'm trying to take break from coffee occasionally. So that's with maximizing benefits, right? What about minimizing harm? What is the main thing that comes to mind when I say that?
Well, there's a number of ways in which people can be harmed by working with these plants, and there is a number of people who can be harmed by working on these plants, because this can hurt the participants, but it can also hurt the facilitators, and harms can come to them. And there's basically three types of harms. One are legal harms. People can get into legal trouble for doing this in some places. Basically everywhere in the world, the arrests are going up, and the confiscations of ayahuasca. Outside of South America, but even in South America now, in Costa Rica, there's been trouble as well. So that's one part of it. One part is physical risks, which harms, which, in the case of, ayahuasca, in this case, for example, they're not so large. Most of the physical harms that come to people from working with ayahuasca are sort of not directly by the ayahuasca, but associated with it. People fall, people get lost, or they fall in the fire, they fall down the stairs, they harm themselves, but it's not directly due to the toxicity of the plants, which is not, it's slow and asymmetric. And then there's the psychological dangers, or the psychological harms, which are larger in the case of psychedelics. that can come to people. And these affect facilitators and participants in different ways. The ways in which participants can be harmed are, one set. And the issues or the dangers that are present for facilitators is a different set of dangers that have to do basically with, power, money, sex, intercultural relationships, and of course the law. These would be the dangers for facilitators, and we talk about this in our safety course. And then the dangers for participants basically are an entire subset of what you would call overwhelming experiences. So the overwhelming experiences go from the sort of temporarily overwhelming during the ceremony to overwhelming or dissociative experiences that sort of continue after the ceremony is over. Sometimes they go away with some time, a few days. Sometimes people go, this goes all the way to the psychotic break, which basically is in itself permanent. It's very rare, but it does happen. And then there are the dangers that come not from the, sort of like effects being too intense, but, the dangers that come basically from less than optimal interpretations of what the experience meant, what the experience was telling them. And then people take action, sometimes quite sudden action, based on what happened in the ceremony, and the effects, instead of improving their lives, turn out to be harmful for themselves or for those around them.
Let's talk about this. How does one distinguish between the voice of the ego, your own voice, or things that ayahuasca is telling you?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big question, and it's not just a question for ayahuasca. This is a question that you can find in many traditions and in many places. For example, recently I was looking into this and the sort of like old Christian perspectives on prophecy, and how, because they also had to develop their own way to discern, is the word that they use, between what they call true prophecies and false prophecies. And both of them, in sort of this Christian cosmology, are presented by different people. True prophecies come from God, false prophecies come from the devil, but they are presented as visions to the prophet. And the prophet has to be able to tell, to discern. So this same question is also present in other spiritual traditions and stuff, and it's the question of, intuition. Intuition versus, you can also make it in that sense. When is your intuition speaking and when is fear, or when is your heart speaking and when is fear, right? So very often people get advice like you should listen to your heart or you should listen to your intuition, and of course that's true. The problem is that, for example, if you have trauma, and because you've been bitten by a dog, you will very strongly feel a very strong intuition that the next dog that crosses you, it might be harmful to you. And you will have a very powerful inner voice telling you that this is absolutely true, but actually it isn't, right? So the main problem, sort of to contextualize this, is that very often people try to make one-size-fits-all advice for situations that are not one-size-fits-all. One-size-fits-all, when you think in clothes and you get a one-size-fits-all, is one t-shirt that doesn't really fit anybody fully well. Because it's too big for some people, too small for others, and then there's a small percentage of people that the shirt fits perfectly right. But I think in these issues of ego, of personal development, or you need a sort of custom-made one-size-fits-all solution is not going to do the trick. You're going to have to sort of adjust and make it for yourself. So in ayahuasca, but also in all these other fields, you find exactly this problem. People sometimes are told by ayahuasca things that are absolutely true, very important, transformative, and meaningful. And then other people, or the same people in other circumstances, are told by ayahuasca things that are in fact, harmful for them, just projections, their own desires, their own fears, their own, it's basically an amplification of their inner turmoil presented with the authority of an outside force or an outside plant. and both things are happening at the same time, and both things are happening in very similar way. So one needs to develop techniques to basically protect oneself from making wrong assumptions about what happened, and to minimize the harm that comes from this. So I will give, for example, a very classic example that very often happens. Very often people drink ayahuasca, and ayahuasca tells them to quit their job, or sometimes to break up with their partner. These are two things that are very common. Of course, our job and our partners are the two most they're the largest relationships that we have in our lives. They take a lot of space, our romantic partner and our job. And very often we have, because they're very close and very strong, we have, difficulties with these relationships, either with job or with partner or with both. Now, sometimes this message, you should quit your job, it's the right thing that the person needs, and it's a message that will be useful for them. And sometimes it isn't. And the question is, and I can give you examples of both. I can give you examples of people who drank ayahuasca, quit their jobs, found something else, and their lives improved enormously. And people who drank ayahuasca, quit their jobs, and then deeply regretted it. And the same for partners and for partnerships. So I think one way to help, there's a number of techniques that can be used to discern on this. But I would say that I'm just again repeating what I learned from very experienced facilitators that I've talked to through the years and just through my own process. I'm not a facilitator, and I didn't come up to these things by myself. I'm merely repeating what I heard from people who know a lot more than me. The first part is that I think, generally speaking, you should distrust anything that comes from ayahuasca that appears as an order instead of as a choice. And this, again, a very experienced facilitator told me that, simply speaking, no messages from the astral world will ever come to you in the form of orders. Those are messages from your subconscious that come in the form of tasks and missions. This is Carl Jung said that when one brings material from the subconscious into the conscious, it usually takes the form of a task or a mission, a duty, something that you must do. However, the messages that come from the astral world, because of I'm repeating what this person told me, because of the particular nature of the rules of the spiritual world, you cannot make human beings do anything. Human beings have free will. So these messages always are presented as choices. You could do this or you could do that. And you still have to make a choice. Sometimes these things come as an offering. You're offered something or you're given something to take. This is still a choice. You still get to say. But when it comes in sort of like, to have to, this is already a sign that one should take this thing with a little bit of careful. Of course, this again, because no one size fits all. This doesn't include things like you have to quit heroin, you have to quit drinking alcohol, you have to quit an abusive relationship. Okay, I mean, there's some there's some things that are harming you, and this will come in the shape of an order, and these orders you should absolutely listen to, right? When you yourself are in danger. This is an exception to this rule. But roughly speaking, if you find yourself in a situation where, for example, ayahuasca has told you to, quit your job, sell everything, move to the jungle, I don't know, or just simply, quit your job or stop your relationship. Let's pick, leave your partner. Ayahuasca told you to leave your partner. This is what you shouldn't do, just for safety, just for precaution. You shouldn't go to your house the next morning and break up with your partner. You should listen to what ayahuasca told you. You should take it in consideration, and then you should give yourself some time. Give yourself 4 weeks, give yourself 8 weeks, give yourself 8 months, and really think about it. Like, is it a good idea to break up with this person? What are the consequences? Are children involved? How are we going to do with the, just think of the logistics and if 3 months later this is still a good idea and it seems like an important idea, then okay. So the first sort of the first test is the test of time. And I would recommend that anybody that gets like a major sort of calling from ayahuasca always gives it the test of time. Because if it's a true calling, it will be true today and it will be true 3 months from now. But if it was just something that happened to you in ayahuasca, well, then it was just because sometimes these things happen. So that's the first test, is the test of time. The second confirmation is from ayahuasca itself. So sometimes you get a message from ayahuasca and then it never comes again. That message is not as important as a message that you get in ayahuasca, and then 3 months later you get it again, and then you drink again and you get it again. So if you get the same message in ayahuasca several times, those messages have more importance than messages that you only get one. So there's a confirmation in time, there's a confirmation by ayahuasca. And third, and then last but not least, there's a confirmation from somebody you respect or somebody who knows you very well. Talk to your friends. And if your friend said, this sounds like something that you should do or that you could do, or knowing you the way I know you, I think this is a good idea for you, or it can be somebody who knows you, it can be somebody you respect. But you want also a sort of a third confirmation. All of these things put together in the clever order can contribute to avoid people making rash decisions that are, very life-changing, that involve a lot of moving pieces, that involves other people, that can be affected. And that, again, if it's important, it will still be important a few months from now. This also goes, for example, for romantic relationships. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes ayahuasca tells you, oh, this person is your ideal partner. You should marry this person. This is the woman of your dreams. This is your destiny. The two of you should be together. Well, of course, many times it has happened and it's been true. Other times it hasn't. So, again, just for precaution, one can let some, time pass. And if it's true love, it's going to be true love 3 months from now. Absolutely. And if these two people, this also, for example, we recommend this also for sort of like business partnerships, which sometimes people have like great visions during ayahuasca. And it's like, I'm going to work together with this person. It's like, of course, maybe, but how about you just let it settle? Because if you're meant to work with this person and and you are really have a good, there really no, it's just sort of the rush, so, some people I know, they give people this rule when they drink ayahuasca, and it's that they're not allowed to make any life-changing decisions until 1 month after the ceremony. And they are required to at least notify the facilitator that they're planning to do this. This is sort of like, in some places, they don't even allow, which I found is very interesting, they don't even allow a person who comes for a retreat, they come for a retreat, for a 5-day retreat. They're not allowed to sign up for a new retreat until 1 month after that retreat is finished. Because sometimes even this is what people get. Oh, I have to drink more. And that's the rush decision. So, if you have to drink, okay, I'm very glad that you read it, that you got this feeling that you want to come back. We're not going to sign you up, and you're not allowed to block, or, we're not going to take any money from you. We're not going to, until, right again, 1 month from today, and we'll be happy to, start over the process and take you back up again. This is just because, again, people enter this state of enchantment, and they're really moved, and it's one of the most powerful things they could ever do. They're moved, they're washed with gratitude, they're completely mind blown at what happened. And then how does one care, properly care and respect the space that has been opened, and does not take for oneself what belongs to the person and to their experience? I mean, see, as you can see, I've been talking and thinking about, these issues now for a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really great list of advices. I would add one more thing, adding interpretation to messages from ayahuasca. So sometimes it's not like it's a yes or it's a no, but it can be a maybe as well, and you have to analyze it a little bit. So if you I don't know, see Jesus in your vision, it doesn't mean you're Jesus. Maybe it means you need to like be more kind to people or sort of embody the values of what a certain thing represents to you or to your subconscious, because sometimes people take things too literally as well, and it does not always work out. Like in my case, ayahuasca told me to work with ayahuasca. It never told me to start an ayahuasca retreat. But then, as soon as I came back from the jungle, synchronicity started happening, and it kind of happened. So I think synchronicity can also be another sign when something seems to be pushing you in some direction as well. Soon after your experience, it seems to correlate with what you've seen with the medicine. Maybe I would pay some extra attention to it. I know it's not something you can scientifically measure, but that kind of I would leave it to people's interpretation, and definitely as long as you give it enough time. So
it arises itself. Yeah, on that topic of interpretation, I have an example. It's a true story. This is a woman who drank ayahuasca and she saw babies, like human babies. And then when she came out of the experience, she interprets that this is a prediction of her future, like I'm going to have babies. And it was only, when I met her years later, that she had married the man that she was with and she had babies with him and then got divorced, that she told me that she now thought that what ayahuasca was telling her is that she and her partner were behaving like babies. Right? So ayahuasca just, there is just an image, is babies. That image in itself doesn't say this, that, or the other, right? And that's where people project their desires or their intentions, or they can. Again, sometimes you can also see babies, and it can absolutely be a message for you to open your heart and for what's coming. This is the discernment part that I think is best done with some sort of support, with someone who has experience with this and can ask the right questions until you find the answer. Because because as you know, sometimes ayahuasca's messages are crystal clear, and sometimes it's more difficult.
Yeah, definitely. Talk to us about inspiration versus appropriation. I really like your Michael Jordan shoes analogy.
I mean, this is something that I was very engaged with this topic in the early 2000s. There were very few people when I started drinking ayahuasca. There were very few people talking about cultural appropriation in the ayahuasca world then. Since then, things has changed a lot, and there's a lot of discussion about this. So it's not something that I used to give talks about this, and a lot more than now. I'm more focused on safety now, but basically, I think it's easier to always think about these things in terms of analogies. It's a lot easier to understand it. So, imagine. I know it's hard, but let's imagine a country in the world where there's no Jewish people, or there's very few Jewish people. And in this country, let's say a young man, becomes fascinated with Jewish spirituality and Kabbalah, and because it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, Jewish spiritual knowledge is like 3,000 years of collective. It's just an amazing. It's an amazing cathedral of knowledge to get into, and this young man becomes fascinated with it and starts reading all he can about it and seeing more things. And then at some point he decides to visit some communities of Orthodox Jews where he spends some time, and he gets fascinated and he's sort of allowed in. And but again, he's very much a foreigner. He's very much a stranger. He doesn't speak the language. He is entering a culture that is very sort of where that is not. It's something that people are born into, and that it's been so. It's not that it's not possible for outsiders to join these communities. It's that it's not very easy. It actually certainly takes a lot of work and it's a lot to. Well, this person spends some time with this, and after 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, I don't know, he goes back to his country where there's nobody has ever seen this. And he puts on a kippah, and he opens a place and he calls it a synagogue, right? In the country where he is, where nobody has ever seen a synagogue, well, maybe this is a rabbi. Why not? Nobody knows, right? obviously, in the Orthodox communities that he visited, they probably have a very different opinion about what this person knows and understands, right? It's basically this simple, it's really this simple, even though it's not seen like that way. There's, I think, a lot of there's people approach indigenous knowledge with very sort of shallow sort of illusions that they can, go to a place, not learn the language, spend 6 months or 2 years, just sort of like, and then learn, something as complex as, Amazonian shamanic practices, and then go ahead and of course, back in their countries, as long as they don't work with indigenous people, nobody's going to be able to tell if they're very good or very bad, because I mean, that it's just, no one has ever seen that, So, one part of it is that, yeah, nobody wants to be that guy. Don't do that. Don't do it. It's simple. I'm not even going to go. It's harmful. It's harmful to you. It's harmful to the culture. It's harmful to other people. Right. Now, at the same time, there is an absolute pressure of knowledge and understanding that comes from the experience of encountering a culture that is deeply foreign to you, and going into the process of learning and understanding this culture, not just for what you understand of this culture, but because of what this culture makes you understand about your culture. Because they do things different, it makes you think about the way that you do things. This is the anthropological experience. All anthropologists that work with other cultures will talk about this endlessly. Just how it just opens your view, your understanding of who you are, what the world is, who other people are. I mean, it's one of the richest things that you can experience. So I'm not at all trying to discourage people from engaging, in intercultural exchanges. I think it's one of the best things that you can do, But, there's certain basic mistakes that are made, and this is what I call or dangers that come with it. And this is what I call the difference between, the difference between inspiration and appropriation. Appropriation is basically taking something that is not yours and copying it and using it usually for profit. So indigenous people, they wear these feathers, I put the feathers. They sing this song, I sing this song. They do this. You're just sort of, aping something. And the mistake in there is mistaking the forms for the spiritual power underneath. So, Michael Jordan, shoots a hoop. It looks very, very simple gesture. It just sort of goes like this, and the ball flies. You could, if you wanted to play basketball and you're coming from another planet, you could look at him and you could try to copy that gesture, But of course, the gesture is not the gesture. The gesture is that he has done this gesture 10 million times since he was, 6 years old, And this gesture is second nature to him. And in the slightest hand, he can calculate the arc of the ball, and he knows the weight of the ball instinctually, and he knows how the ball flies through the air. So he can so anybody can the gesture is easy enough. Anybody can copy it, but chances are you're not going to make it to the basket. Similarly, in traditional Amazonian medicine, there's a number of ritual gestures. For example, blowing tobacco, or blowing agua florida, or singing certain songs, or clearing people with ashakapa. And these gestures are relatively simple. They're seen easy to copy. They are, in fact, easy to copy. What is not easy to copy is the 40 years that they put into actually getting that part right. It's all the dietas, that are being manifested in the songs, and the power that comes from their songs are the powers not in the songs, but in the dietas of the person who's singing the song, and the power is not in the mapacho, but it's in the strength of the curandero, of his dietas, and the work that the mapacho sort of and the tobacco smoke is being expressed over. So when now, and again, this doesn't mean, and I don't think at all, that people who are not indigenous cannot learn to do a proper soplada and do the proper dietas. And of course they can. This is not, it's not the same that people who are born into it and who are doing it since they were 5 years old. Same with, flamenco singing in Spain, or just sort of many other, pick a cultural tradition. But so when the danger with when white people who are not doing proper, shamanic training in the jungle approach these practices is that they think, well, I can just pick it up, do what they do, and eat the same. That's appropriation. The interesting that's appropriation. Appropriation is like you said, is like thinking that you can wear Michael Jordan shoes and you can play like Michael Jordan. So what does the shaman have? The feathers, the necklace with the teeth. I take all of these things and I have the same things as the shaman. Therefore, but this is just like Michael Jordan shoes. They're just like, of course they help. The shoes might, they're better shoes than others, and those shoes help, but they are a small part of what's going on. They're just sort of like and then on the other side of this is what I would call inspiration. Inspiration is trying to understand what are the universal human needs that and universal human solutions that are underneath what you see. Right. So you look at a soplada, for example, and when as and I know I've gotten many wonderful soplada. There can be during ayahuasca ceremony a before and after you get the soplada. That's how powerful they are. I mean, they're incredibly effective. You go and you get this, and it just sort of realigns and brings you back. I mean, it can do all sorts of things. That's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it, the aspect that I would say it's universal, the aspect where you can be inspired, is that what's happening is sometimes during the ceremony, people are going to have difficult or very difficult times. And then in those times, a soplada can help. That is, there's going to be times, not just with ayahuasca, in general with psychedelics, in which people are going to need support. They're going to need active help from somebody else. And this help takes form of an act. It has to take the form of an act of care. The facilitator has to do something to the participant where the participant knows that they're being cared for. And this when you're receiving a soplada. I mean, it's obvious that, and that's how people open their arms. People open themselves up because they know they're going to receive, they're being cared for, right? But this act of care has to have a language that is not the language of everyday life. Our act of care are, I'm going to give you a hug. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to put my arm around your shoulders. All of these are acts of care in our culture. All of these acts are questionable within the psychedelic experience. Why? Because they can be mistaken for somebody else. Depending on the person, giving them a hug is exactly what they need, or is the most triggering, traumatic thing that can happen to them. It's not in the hug, it's in the person who receives it, and whether they need it and what's their particular history. And there's all sorts of things that have gone wrong with this, even, in clinical settings. However, the thing about a soplada is that it is an act of care that uses a different language. So you're being cared for, but this cannot be mistaken for anything romantic or anything else. It doesn't, it's just, so for me, the deeper issue, the inspiration issue that is being solved in sopladas is, how do you touch people during psychedelics without touching them? And the answer is, well, you can touch them with your breath, you can touch them with feathers, you can touch them with a leaf fan, and you can touch them with many. There's ways to actually care for people, and people need it, and people will appreciate it, that are not, this language, which are, in clinical psychedelic trials, that are stuck with these problems. It's like, can I hold your hand? Is it okay if I put my arm around your shoulders? It's like, this is not it. It's like, what is the language? What is the language that is needed here so people feel cared for? And it cannot be mistaken for anything else. That insight cannot be half without the experience of traditional indigenous knowledge. And at the same time, it doesn't need to copy, the form in order to benefit from the insight, right? This is the difference between inspiration and appropriation.
Yeah, that's a really important topic to touch, and I love your explanation. We have a shaman, right? A taita here, they call them in Colombia. For most people, it just seems like pours you a cup and he gives you a cup, and sometimes he makes some sounds, and then he sits in his hammock, and it looks like, well, this is really easy. I can do it as well. But in reality, the underlying sort of spiritual work and the training, as you say, starting, he was 6 years old when he started training. That is the part that's really difficult to emulate, and it can lead to a lot of issues. And I've met people that did this. They come and they drink medicine, and they find 1 month course on internet about how to become a shaman, and then they're like, I'm a shaman now. Obviously, I have a license, I have a signed document, but it is like putting a Santa Claus costume is not doesn't make you a Santa Claus. And but the interesting part that's not often talked about is that the appropriation doesn't have to be done from a white person to an indigenous person. It can also be done from one indigenous person to another, especially now when there's a lot of money in the medicine. A lot of people that we know the way they look, and they will wear the feathers and the bracelets and the uniform and like all the clothing of a shaman. Some of them will look more shaman than my real shaman, you know? And it's really hard to tell the difference. However, they have no idea what they're doing. Even a white blonde facilitator that's been working with the medicine for a few years will know much more than they do, but they will make it look absolutely believable, and then they can hurt people because they have no idea what they're doing. So yeah, what talking about the indigenous topic, what are the in our psychedelic renaissance now, what are the things we can learn? What are the things we should bring from them, from the point of view of this maximizing benefits and minimizing the harms?
Well, I mean, this is the reason why I work. I don't work in psychedelic medicine, but in plant medicine, because I think, well, I mean, basically, I think that if you are about to start doing something new, you know, if you were an extraterrestrial and you were about to start making wine, maybe you'd be well advised to at least spend some time, or at least take some tips from people in the Mediterranean basin who've been drinking and making wine for 5,000 years. It's not that you could also start making wine by yourself and find your own way. You absolutely. It's just you're just gonna make a lot more mistakes along the way. And there's some mistakes that can be saved. Now, psychedelics in general, the experience that psychedelics bring and how to manage them are extremely new for us culturally. I'm talking about Western people. Basically, LSD brings this back in the 60s, and we're not very good at doing LSD, or the amount of accumulated sort of knowledge that we have since the 60s about this is not great at all. At the same time, there's a sort of arrogance that comes from the medical professions, from biomedical professions, that say, well, this is brain chemistry, and I'm a psychiatrist, or this is psychological process, and I'm a psychologist, or this is a medicine and I'm a doctor, and therefore I should be the one doing this. And then they start inventing by themselves ways to do this. These ways usually look, now if you Google psychedelic assisted therapy, what you're going to see is an image of a person laying in a bed. It's a very sparse room. Maybe there's a flower on a vase. They're laying in a bed. They have a blanket. They have a face mask, and they have some headphones, and they're listening to a playlist. And there's usually two therapists with them. This is like for example, ketamine clinics also look like this. The better ones. In other ones, you only have a chair. This is sort of like, this is what people that come from the medical profession have decided this is the way to do it, which is basically what it looks, because it looks like what they were doing before. They were doing psychology before, and people were laying, like Freudian, they were laying in the couch, and the psychologist was sitting next to them. So now we're just going to give them psychedelics and do, very similar, about play some music and right. This is what I mean about the arrogance. And I think there's a treasure of knowledge. And I'm for a moment, I'm going to put to aside, the cultural and spiritual knowledge, because, that gets enough said. And because for some of these people, medical doctors, the whole cultural and spiritual thing already they don't like. So even putting this aside, which is, this treasure, like I said, this cathedral of knowledge, just the practical insights that you can find in ceremonial plant work about how best to sort of, what is the better container for psychedelics, are there already. It's like you need to you need to sort of retire a little bit from the world. You need to gather with a group of people, ideally in a place that is, quiet and peaceful, where you're not going to get disturbed. Everybody is going to drink at the same time, and there's going to be one person who has more experience than the rest, who's responsible for the group, and who's going to engage in some sort of ritual act, usually involving music, that can not just direct the experience of the people, but also reflect it. This is what a playlist doesn't do. A playlist goes in the order it goes, and it doesn't matter if you're happy and the playlist is now sad, or if you're sad and the playlist is now happy. That's no good. You want to have something around the people that actually reflects in a way that is hard to describe, just sort of goes together with their experience. You want to diffuminate, you want to blur the lines between the experience of the person and the work of the facilitator. And you do this, and you do this in a group. And when people are having troubles, you need to, you need to sort of engage in some acts of care that will make the person feel better. I mean, I'm being super, you see how like basic I'm being, like that's why I say I put away the cultural and spiritual aspects. I'm just talking about, very, very practical things that psychedelic medicines could learn from the traditions if they just sort of looked with some humility, and then you get something, very, very different from a person laying in the couch with a pair of headphones, And the most amazing thing about this is that, I know many psychedelic scientists, people who are doing, the important research in different universities, and these are psychedelic scientists. When you ask them personally how they like to take their psychedelics, they like to take their psychedelics in ceremonial plant practices. This is what they like. It's taking plants in plant circles what got them interested in many cases in the research that they're doing. And yet in their research, they are proposing something for people that is different from what they themselves prefer for themselves. Right? This is the sort of a contradiction that we're living in. So a lot of my work has to do with trying to bridge these two worlds and trying to get the scientists and the academics to understand the value of these cultures, not as cultural spiritual things, because sometimes, as I say, for many of them this is hard to swallow, but as essentially practical, pragmatic solutions developed by intelligent human beings over hundreds of years of practice and relationship to certain substances that are actually very new to us. So, why don't just take a look, because it's up. There's a treasure. There's a treasure chest of good practices and knowledge and information there that can be helpful. This is it's this sort of work of how to again bridge between these two very different fields of knowledge, trying to speak the language of the other to the other. So understanding that most scientific people are not going to be, super open to cultural or spiritual arguments, and that again, there's certain types of the ways of speaking when one is dealing with indigenous traditions as well, but that there is an opportunity. There's an opportunity for basically for saving us a lot of mistakes. So if you look at the history of these powerful plants, tobacco, coca, cacao, right? All of these plants, we came in contact over 500 years ago with the encounter with America. Our use of these plants was almost always more toxic and more problematic than the use that the cultures of origin had. The way we use coca is, you can argue much more harmful than the way indigenous people use it. The way we use tobacco is much more harmful. Every time one of these plants came, it was used in different ways from the original people that were more harmful. And this pattern has repeated itself over 500 years until we get to ayahuasca. And then something happens that has never happened before. And is that you look at ayahuasca ritual in Europe, and it looks on the surface level, the sort of top level, very similar to an ayahuasca ritual in a traditional Amazonian ritual. And that's the first time that this has happened in history.
Another thing you say is ayahuasca is not just a medicine, and it can also, not everyone who drinks it is sick. So talk to us about the other uses for ayahuasca.
I mean, I think it's my personal opinion that that psychedelics might be better prevention tools than intervention tools. So that the most benefits that you can get is not that psychedelics cannot help people who have severe depression or post-traumatic or anxiety or all of these things. Is that if you had taken some people and given them ayahuasca a little bit earlier, before they begin to develop these symptoms, they probably would have never fallen into them in the first place. I think the most interesting and widely applicable field for psychedelics is prevention, is what doctors call prevention, not treatment. Also because psychedelics are very powerful and very delicate, and when you are giving them to people who have very severe conditions, as you know, then the container has to be very, very tight. So you give psychedelics to a normally healthy person regularly, generally speaking, this is an experience that can more or less be managed with some. But if you're going to give psychedelics to people who have serious mental health issues, then you need the container, the amount of attention, the amount of people, it multiplies by several fold. And that's why usually it's discouraged. And you say, I think there's also a lesson there that we are ignoring. People are using psychedelics to treat severe conditions because that's the door that was open. Because we don't have medicines for, treatment-resistant depression. We don't have medicines for, complex PTSD. So that door was open, and we went that way with the psychedelics. But it might be that in the future we realize that the best application for psychedelics, or at least the easier application for psychedelics, has to do more with prevention. Most people who take psychedelics don't have a medical diagnosis. They're doing because they have a life crisis or because they want to know themselves better. They have to make a decision. They're going through some transition, through some grief. You can call it many things, but it's not an illness. It's not a medical condition. It's just life. It's just life, and life comes with difficulties. And in those difficulties, these plants can help. But right now, what is being developed is the legal pathways for these pharmaceutical compounds to be used in extreme cases for very serious mental health conditions. And I think my experience in plant medicine circles for 20 years is that where these plants really shine, or where you can see sort of consistent improvement or transformation in people, it's before these problems are developed, and it's when people are beginning to face this, and these plants have this amazing ability to sort of change people's direction, make them step out of when they're about to step into the poop, just shoops on the last minute, they take their foot out.
Yeah, there's much in this medicine. Healing is a big part of it, very important, but then there's also spiritual side of things, which is very deep and almost limitless. Jeronimo, it was a really interesting conversation. It's time for us to wrap up. So please tell people more about your work. Where can they find you? How can they support you? etc.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I will share some links with you. But I would just close with saying if people are interested in the part of safety and the safety of these practices, we have a course that is every year, increasing the safety of ayahuasca ceremonies, which is not a course to learn to be a facilitator. It's a course for people who are already facilitating and want to improve their safety. So it's a very unique course, and we talk a lot about these things. About, like, for example, the ayahuasca told me, and how to avoid the pitfalls and the dangers that come and increase safety. We are a foundation. So we're an NGO, we're a nonprofit. We live off the generous donations of people that want to support our work. In our website, you will find how to contribute, and we have many different resources and skills available, both for participants, for facilitators, for policymakers, for researchers, for academics, etc. So, please visit our website.
Thank you, Jeronimo. Guys, check out where can they find your course, or where can any links or any?
It's iceers.academy, but I will send you some links if you want, so you can maybe put it in there. But it's ICEERS.academy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you guys for listening. As always, we are the hosts, Sam Believ, and I will see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support us and psychedelic renaissance at large, please follow us and leave us a like wherever it is you're listening. Share this episode with someone who will benefit from this information. Nothing in this podcast is intended as medical advice, and it is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you. So